I used to be afraid of you, but I don't think I am anymore.
There's nothing to fear except God.
For me, God is a disease.
It's the things that make you look at what you thought you saw in a different light. The hole in the Pentagon being too small for a plane. The lawn isn't mussed up. The government's not showing the plane hitting when many cameras photographed it.
There's nothing to fear except God. God. God.
Oh, if you already know the answers to your questions, then why ask?
It's too big.
Back and to the left, 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 back and to the left.
What's up, everybody? I have a good friend. I will not say his last name. I will not dox him, but he bailed on the episode. He's one of my good Ken Burns buddies, but I'm here with Austin once again to talk about Ken Burns' American Revolution series. I kind of took my time getting through it. We were debating whether, like, what our next episode was going to be, just because this friend, and also Austin, sir, me and Nico got together and watched The Age of Disclosure, which I think I was texting you about, which is like an alien doc that had a lot of hype on it. And I thought it was terrible. I mean, Nico thought the same thing. There's just so much that was wrong with it. Like, Nico will come on the podcast and we'll talk about aliens. I don't know where I'm at with it. There's so much misinformation. And at the same time, it's like when Marco Rubio is telling you that aliens are real, it's like, okay.
Ew.
He has this huge monologue where he's like, America didn't know that Japan would attack Pearl Harbor. That's a lie. And then he goes, we also didn't know that, Osama bin Laden would do 9/11. Also a lie. And then he goes, similarly, we don't know if aliens will like attack us. It's like, okay, bro, if your premise that aliens could surprise us are that two events we've been lied to the entire time, like the whole history of since Pearl Harbor and since 9/11 happened, we've been gaslit, lied to, completely, told that the mainstream narrative on these events is just, it couldn't be further from what they told us. And now you're going to tell me that aliens are real. So I was just disgusted. It was just a really badly made doc too. It was like the production value was shitty. And I have a schizophrenic mind because I love like conspiracy theories. I love looking into any crazy shit. I love crazy stories. I love crazy people. I love divisive people. I love controversial people. I love people that say crazy stuff. So, just in my life, I'll like listen to podcasts. And so I've looked into alien type stuff, and there are compelling stories in The Age of Disclosure, but the movie sucked so bad. It was such a letdown. And, there's no reason to really waste too much time on it. But that was the episode I really wanted to do with Nico. And I thought it was going to be awesome. I thought at bare minimum, but it was so bad where I was like, I feel like this filmmaker, I mean, he had like James Clapper, and he had fucking, oh my God, dude. He had John Brennan. He had these two guys who are like two of the most pathological liars known to mankind, saying aliens are real. John Brennan. Guess what John Brennan's job was in the 90s?
What?
He was working at the Jeddah consulate in Saudi Arabia, and he gave the 9/11 hijackers their passports.
Ugh.
He gave them their passports, and now he's telling us that aliens are real. Okay, bro. Yeah, glad the filmmaker did zero research on who the people he's talking to are. And like the whole doc is just like, look at this, politicians are telling us aliens are real. Doesn't that mean they're real? It's like, we're at the lowest point of believing politicians or the intelligence community on any of this shit. Get out of my face with this. So anyway, Ken Burns, American Revolution, 1776. Here we go. I'm going to stop talking about this alien stuff. We'll have Nico on and we'll have a better discussion when it's not about a poorly made movie. And we'll actually go into the topic. So anyway, yeah, what did you it was the Ken Burns I was really pumped on this series because Ken Burns, I have very specific issues with him. I don't think he's the greatest documentary filmmaker of all time. I don't think he's necessarily the guy who has the most objective opinion on American history. But I do think he's a truly iconic American in so many ways, and it's because he really wants to communicate American history uh, to people, which I appreciate. So he's up and down for me. I think at his worst, he's always like really solid. Like you can learn new things, blah blah blah. I think some of his films are better than others. Um, but yeah, I'm overall a big fan because I'm a huge history fan. I was really pumped on this just because of the timing of when he's doing this in his career. The fact that he's made an entire like epic career where, if you're in a history class in high school, a teacher will throw on a Ken Burns Civil War episode for like the last like 30 years. It's like he's in the consciousness, and I'm a diehard baseball fan, and the Ken Burns baseball series is magic. And I don't know. I have problems with his Vietnam series. I think we can get into that a little later, but I was really excited about him deciding to do arguably the biggest event in American history at this stage of his career. It felt like a good time for him to do this because I think he's probably already researched it before in his life, but it just seemed like a good timing. So I was really pumped on it, but I am curious, what were your thoughts either going into it or how did you like when you started watching some of the episodes? Like, have you've seen Ken Burns stuff before, right?
I've seen the Civil War one, and
Yeah.
I've
And the
definitely
Civil
seen
War
something
one
in
is
high school,
incredible.
but that's not like actually watching.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was glad you brought that up. That like we definitely probably watched this at some point in high school because I remember thinking as soon as it started, I was like, "Wait, I've seen this format. I've heard this narrator's voice. What the hell?"
Yep. Ken Burns effects. It's like a photograph or a painting, and there's like a little zoom.
Yeah, yeah.
That's literally something that, I mean, I don't want to go as far as to say he invented it, but he became very known for doing that.
Right. I
And
remember disliking it quite a lot when I was younger. Being
well,
like,
it's like a cliche that people use like in like projects, like they're
yeah.
showing. But yeah, it was
Now I was also thinking of the timing, just like in terms of our country right now
right.
when
Yeah,
it
yeah,
comes
yeah.
out, which is very interesting
Well, and
because
Trump is always talking shit about like defunding PBS as well, which is
yeah,
really funny.
we
in
got to watch
regards
this for
to,
free on their website.
yeah, it's free. Anyone listening
And
to
you
this
can just stream
podcast,
it to your TV with
you
like
can-
no account or anything.
it's like it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild that it's like that easy to like watch it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think obviously people think our country's divided now, but I think it's always I don't know, I think it's always been divided every
Right.
moment. I mean, obviously there's moments when the country comes together, but there was a quote in the documentary that I found really profound that was in a way this is kind of like the first civil war of the United
Yeah.
States of America, and this actual Civil War is like the second one.
Yeah, I heard him saying that like in press before I saw this. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I know different things about different periods of history and stuff. I've never been like a super expert on the American Revolution. But just knowing that this film was coming out, I read the Joseph Ellis biography on George Washington, and Joseph Ellis has some pretty cool He's throughout the doc. He pops up as a talking head, but no, it is really true. I mean, so Ken Burns went on Joe Rogan a couple months ago, and he just had such a like poetic, like incredible appearance where he's just like quoting like Abraham Lincoln and just bringing up the American Revolution and talking about Jack Johnson, and which is another Ken Burns film I know is incredible. Brings up Huey Long, which I think is probably his best film. I just watched that with Eamon, this, you know, divisive lunatic who tried to become the dictator of Louisiana in the 30s, Huey Long, who got assassinated. And he wanted to seize the means of production and wanted to like literally redistribute wealth in Louisiana. Yeah. And there's people in that movie that like live through his like reign, and they're like, yeah, I'm glad he was killed. It's insane, bro. It's fucking insane because Huey Long is like one of these ultimate, like, because I feel like with Ken Burns, my real ideological issue is not so much his politics, because we can get into like all the different things about this specific series, but I think even before we've gotten into the era we're in, I think he's always kind of been a little bit sanitized. Like he I don't know. I like as an editor, even me just reading this Joseph Ellis biography, and right before we started, I went back and I was looking through things that I circled. And there's so many things I was just looking at where I was like, yeah, Ken Burns probably should have emphasized this a little bit more. Like he has this kind of like poet, but which I appreciate. I still do appreciate his style. He has this kind of overarching, like inspirational. I mean, again, to some degree, it definitely is a neoliberal vision of like history for sure. There is that, you know, political perspective, but I don't really think that's the real issue. Like his series, the Vietnam series, I think is way more is just that he like doesn't really have a cutting. He's not like a cutting guy, if that makes sense. Like he's kind of like he's a good entry for something. Like in the Vietnam series, he really just doesn't have like the fire to be like, this is like times 10, because we're always told Vietnam is like the biggest disaster. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And he's kind of an apologist for the Vietnam War in that series, I want to say, because I think part of it is that he has so much respect for the veterans. He doesn't want to piss off all the veterans he's talking to. And it's obviously it's not the veterans' fault, but it's definitely the general's fault, you know, the
Fucking baby
president and
killer.
stuff. Yeah, well, yeah, I'm not saying that. But no, I don't know. I mean, he has lines in that series where he brings up the Gulf of Tonkin and he's just like, yeah, when the Gulf of Tonkin happened, these two radar people, they like thought that they saw a blip on the radar and they thought that that was a missile. And it's like, wait a second, Ken. You mean that the U.S. government lied to get us into a war that was the biggest disaster in American history? He doesn't say that. He says,
Right.
"Oh yeah, some radar operators, they just got it wrong." It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Cut the shit. Everybody knows that this is a fucking fake event. An attack didn't even happen. That's what a historian will say. And like it's like out of this like apologism or like this apologist mindset of like, oh well, I think they probably just made an honest mistake. It wasn't just
Ugh.
completely corrupt and fucked up. No, that's what I'm saying about the Vietnam series that I got really pissed about. And he did that with the Phoenix program, which is one of the most insidious, evil special operations in the history of the United States. We were torturing people, throwing people into torture dungeons. They would never get out, had no rights, cutting people's heads off and uh, displaying the bodies to psychologically fuck with their families. And he brings
Ugh.
up the Phoenix program acting like it's just like an operation. He doesn't bring up any of the details of how insane, like it's like the psychological operation. People that were involved in the Phoenix program, they played into the fears of the Vietnamese populace, and they did a war on the Vietnamese population of innocent people. They hyped up their fear of vampires. They would do 2 puncture wounds in someone's neck and like cut their head off and like put them in front of their family. Swear to
Yeah.
God. Swear to God, he doesn't bring up any of that. Doesn't bring up any of that. And it's like, dude, you can't just say. And then I think he has a line in that series where he's like, yeah, we needed more operations like Phoenix to win the war. It's like, I mean, and then he even admits that, 60,000 people, 80,000, like it's a lot of people were like essentially either tortured or died in like these insane ways. So I don't know what I kind of liked about the last episode and some of the last episodes, and we can get into like the politics of American Revolution just from the era we're in. People are some of the shit talking about it is that it's woke and all this shit, but I don't know if I'd go that far as say that. My take on it is that having a bunch of female historians, having black people, having Native Americans talk about the American Revolution, I think that's an interesting counterpoint because it shows without you even having to say it that times are different, And to say that Ken Burns is looking at the founding fathers the way that not to talk shit on the podcast about American history, but some of the people, let's say that we went to college with or something, no one we're like friends with, but I think the average like 20-year-old is like, oh yeah, slave holder, they're evil. That's it. America shouldn't exist. Fuck America. It should burn down to the ground. George Washington's part of the KKK. It's like in one battle after another, which is, I think is a funny moment, but I don't think that's the point of this scene, right? Is when Leo says, he calls Benjamin Franklin the Grand Wizard.
Fucking slave owners, man.
But people believe that. They don't believe America should exist, which is what I appreciate with Ken Burns, is that he's pro-America, even though he's willing to give a vast diversity of opinions. And guess what? I think talking about every atrocity that was committed, talking about the evils of slavery, I think talking about the abuse of the Native Americans, all of it should be there. That was my main criticism of the Vietnam doc, that he didn't talk about the brutality enough, right? And when we think about an 18th century conflict, it is a real thing. I mean, in World War I, in the 20th century, the notion of warfare became way more apocalyptic in the sense of like wars on civilian populations were way more rampant. And in the era of the American Revolution, it's almost like innocent, the idea that it's only soldiers like getting killed. So when you hear about massacres and stuff, right? Or traitors getting shot in the face. I mean, growing up, when you hear about people getting tarred and feathered, you kind of think of it as a funny thing. But
I remember that.
It's fucking brutal, bro. It's like you're like literally torturing someone who doesn't agree with your like ideological position and embarrassing them. Like there's a brutality of the American Revolution that I really appreciated that he came forward with. I think my more criticism as far as like this, and again, there's just so much information, it's hard to know what to cut and what to keep, like in the grand scheme of it. Like it's just so much information. But I don't know, the woke allegations I think are kind of ridiculous. Like if you're watching a Ken Burns film and you think that he's like a right-wing guy, it's like, come on. Like this guy has always been like a liberal guy making semi-sanitized series about history, and but he tells it how it is. Like I don't think I don't think he's like excluding any information to like form like a point of view, you know what I mean? And I think if you're gonna make the claim that he made this series, he hates America, it's just like, I mean, that's clearly not true. Like he clearly loves America. Like he's clearly a very patriotic guy. So you can't really go all the way to the bank with that. And because again, at the end of the day, like the super left wing argument about the American Revolution is it should have never happened, I guess, or I don't know what someone would say who like But that's not really Ken Burns' point of view. You know, he's optimistic about the idea that these slave owners can uh, write a document that can transcend that. You know, when you talk about Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, that's where he gets inspired. Is the idea that these guys were so flawed. And I was almost thinking these are almost like ancient Greek societies or some shit. Is like almost my comparison, because I read a biography on. I think I've read at least one biography on Julius Caesar, and it's so bizarre how ancient the beginning of America is when you really think about it. But it does kind of resemble like an ancient Rome or ancient Greece or something, where you can only it's like they're calling themselves like a democracy or a republic, and only landowning men can like vote. And then on top of it, there's like slavery and all this stuff. And it's like these people are so like they're so smart. There's no way around it. I mean, the type of legal minds that were in George Washington's administration. I mean, he had Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe in his cabinet. It's like
Yeah.
these guys were writing like the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, Declaration of Independence type shit. Like, uh, you know, all these different names. It's like it was just a different caliber of person to be able to found this country. And like, yeah, there's obviously an, an an evil that should be talked about as far as like slavery and stuff, but you can't take away from like the legal genius of like a lot of these people, like the legal and like literary mindset to like write a constitution. It's like what goes into that, like it's a very particular kind of personality.
And it has to be so obsessive with every single word, almost like when people kind of like debate Bible scriptures and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like what does this mean, and how like the Constitution that we have still has like open-ended things.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's
And
obviously why we have amendments too, but it's I don't understand, like I feel that sometimes when I think about like movie making, how it's like, are you doing like a stream of consciousness thing, or are you obsessed with like every little detail that it has to be perfect?
Mhm.
I don't know if that makes sense or not, but like I just feel like writing that would have been like so stressful.
Yeah, honestly. And I was always I've never really been, I've always kind of been a history guy. I've always really been fascinated by history. I was more like a World War II kind of interest growing up,
Mm.
but I remember just hearing about it in class and stuff and again, it's pretty crazy. Like, the idea that the Constitution, you just had all these like brilliant guys that like literally fought in a war for independence. And by the way, that's another, little slight thing where it's like, okay, we've heard about with Ken Burns, it's like he'll touch on all the landmark stuff, and he doesn't bring too there's a couple things I do think he brings new to this series that I feel like is very important. Um but the landmark of all these guys being in a room debating out the Constitution, I've always loved that image. Like the fact that it's like the summer of like 1787 or something, or 1786. It's just super hot in like Philadelphia or something, and they're all just fighting to the death over how to like describe this government. And if you think, I mean, there's 100 different directions we can go with this conversation, but the idea that anyone in our current era could even touch the type of like language that they reach, and again, it's obviously not perfect by any means. Like people are even saying that in that last sequence when they're talking about the Constitution, but it is fascinating how
Mm.
certain periods of history are completely forgotten. Like the Articles of Confederation, Ken Burns just flies right over it. Like, and it's like kind of scary. Like, they were calling Washington like a dictator. They were calling him a king. Like pretty much any president that becomes a legend is called a king. but he really was like incredibly powerful as like a general, and he decided, not to become a king. He
Yeah.
decided to step away in all these junctures. He was the ultimate, like, kind of what people saw in Obama when they saw kind of like a reserved guy, like a guy that's like politically correct, a guy that's like makes a decision. I feel like that's like how far back that vibe goes. Is that Washington was
Yeah.
pretty fucking reserved. He was pretty willing to like step aside. He was pretty willing to delegate. He wasn't college educated. I mean, I think he graduated like 10th grade or something. And
Yeah.
he still was like a military genius, which we can get into. But no, it is interesting. Even in this conversation, I feel like a lot of the series, like the first 3, 4, 5 episodes, are like literally like 1760. I think the first episode is like 1760 up until like 1774, 1775, and then I swear to God, there's like 3 or 4 episodes in a row that are like 1 year or like two
Yeah.
years, and then he covers like 5 or 8 years in the last episode. And you're like, okay. So I was a little confused by that at times, but um, no, I think it's interesting how chaotic the Articles of Confederation stuff got, and just how that really needs to be talked about in general in history. Not saying that that is the American Revolution, obviously. I didn't even think he was going to talk about the Constitution because it was after the American Revolution. But
Mm.
no, I think my main takeaway is just it's just Washington, bro. I mean, that black dude comes in, and he's like, "Yeah, I didn't black historian." He's like, "I don't really believe in the great man theory of history, and I don't know if America would exist without George Washington." And
Yeah. You
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 know,
notice how like most of the greatest like figures in American history are very interesting and also like extremely poetic and eloquent.
mhm.
And this time period has maybe 70% of them.
Oh well, yeah. Like in terms of like
It's
the
just
whole
stacked.
history of, yeah, it's super stacked, and there are so many people that Burns doesn't really talk about that much at all. Like I don't think he talks about Jefferson or Franklin that much at all.
No, Franklin's just kind of like making like cool quotes the whole time. Jefferson's in it a little bit, but
Yeah,
yeah.
but man, it's really George Washington. Like he was like he was slighted by the British. They wouldn't give him like a pension after the French and Indian War, I believe.
Yeah, I remember
And
writing something about that. I was
yeah,
like,
he
"Oh,
was slighted. And again, it's like there are again, I mean, I was just saying this to a friend the other night. There's something because Washington was always talking about providence. He was always talking about like destiny in a sense. And with great historical figures, or figures that, I mean, great is like also a term that people kind of they don't really want to acknowledge what that word means, right? It's
mm,
consequential. It's not morally good, right? I mean, someone who's a general in an army, like obviously he's killing people, he's killing the enemy, and he had slaves. There's a crazy ass story that I again, if you're like a super right wing person, you get offended that this is in the doc. I think that's idiotic. Like, because I thought it was a chilling example of like what this guy was. Right? It's this story where he's like he like is asking a black kid to help him do stuff or something, and then the guy is like, "Oh yeah, are you going to pay me a wage?" And he would he found it Washington thought it was intemperate that the black kid would like ask him for money to like to do chores for him.
yeah.
And I was like, that's so fascinating. And also infamously, which wasn't really taught to us in school, which it probably should be, is the fact his dentures. There was always that thing about his dentures that they were like from a
Wooden.
horse.
It was like wooden teeth, and
Yeah, they
that's
were.
actually not a thing."
Yeah, we were told he had wooden teeth, but in reality, they like ripped teeth out of a slave's mouth and like put them into his
God,
mouth,
yeah.
which is pretty dark. And they kind of bring it up in the doc. I don't even know if they talked about that much. So again, he had slaves. I think he did free all of his slaves when he died. Um,
Mm.
Even though and again, that's another extremely dark aspect of the American Revolution. That's just true. I mean, I don't think lying about it is a good is a good idea. I mean, I the whole notion of looking back at history is that you got to look at things in a very sober-minded way, and certain things age better, certain things don't. I mean, George Washington still comes across as, one of the all-time great presidents and one of the greatest leaders in the history of the world, even though he had this view. And I mean, I was saying this to my other friend, or the same friend, before we recorded this podcast, just being like, Washington, he would write like letters to his family. He'd be like, yeah, I hate everybody that like I'm commanding. Like he would be like, I'm exaggerating it, but he like it wasn't just that he like didn't like black people, thought they should be slaves, all this kind of stuff, which is obviously evil. He literally was like, fuck people from Boston, fuck people
Yes.
from Phil. Like he was like pro Virginian. He was like, I like Virginians. I don't like I don't like the other colonists. And he would admit that like in his letters is what I've heard. I don't know if Burns brings that up in the doc, but it just shows you how like tribal that like moment was. And again, make no mistake, Washington was really rich. I mean, to be in his position, to be this general, to
Oh yeah,
be the
he's
leader.
in one of the richest people in the country at the
Yeah,
time.
exactly. To be in that position, and it's always been like that in the history of America, in the history of the world. A lot of times the people that just has the most money end up becoming like the leaders and stuff through inheritance, whether that be like royalty. And it's so crazy because by today's standards, it's like kind of glaring like aspects of Washington. But at the time, I mean, they even bring it up late in the series where they're like, the French were looking at Washington and they're like, man, this guy is like, he did it all with merit. They just picked the best guy. That's how like the French, our allies, were looking at Washington. They were like, no, he's not a monarch at all, you know. But no, just to slow walk it a little bit more, because we're kind of touching on a bunch of stuff, but early on, so what is essentially the way I understand the American Revolution. I have different perspectives on how I believe the revolution went that I would amend Ken Burns' telling of it. I think the series is still pretty amazing. I love the maps. I want to say I love the maps. I love the
Yeah.
paintings, the maps, the paintings, the quotes. That's the kind of stuff you watch Ken Burns for. Like the Ken Burns effect, I've never really had an opinion on it. I've grown to really like it, but just the archival, like there are some really unique paintings in this series where you see like all kinds of looks at what Washington would have looked like here, or what this battle looked like, and again, just all the maps where you see how small America was. It's basically just the East
Mm.
Coast. It's
Oh,
literally
it's
just like
yeah.
it's just the East Coast. It's like I know that might even sound like idiotic to say that out loud, as if I don't never realized that. But just that's like one of the things you like pick up on. But so the narrative of the American Revolution, we're told a certain kind of narrative. I think there's a way to look at it in a different way. I don't think the series, because I think the way that the American Revolution is taught is that overall these were like pretty incredible guys and they were able to defeat all the odds and they were a huge underdog and they were able to do this against the odds, and it's like impossible and it's miraculous, all this kind of stuff. The reality is, specifically with General Howe, I believe, and I
Oh.
was even looking back in my book, the Joseph Ellis. So I read a really interesting book on the American Revolution a couple years ago that basically, I forget even what it was called, but it really makes the pitch that the British themselves didn't really want this war. And I think that was kind of, if you're really into history, you could figure this out before the Ken Burns series. But America, we didn't really have the strongest grievances for independence. And there's a lot of
Yeah,
angles to
that's a
that.
big misconception
Yeah,
in
we
our
were
country.
treated we were treated pretty good. Like we really went to 10. We went, the Boston Tea Party and the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre is like, okay, that sets off a lot of stuff, but the Boston Tea Party, like we were flipping out over And to the degree that in 1795, when Washington was president, he tried to, do like a whiskey tax, and people started like protesting in the streets and not
Yeah,
paying
that
the
went bad.
tax. And it's like that's just like never been a thing outside of that one moment. Like, which again, I think is also a beautiful thing about the American Revolution, that they were so against getting taxed. But the reality is, we had pretty favorable status, and the British really, really wanted us to have some kind of partnership with them. And they didn't want it. I don't think a lot of people here wanted it. I mean, I would almost go as far to say that for the majority of the American Revolution, maybe 60% of America, or 50% of, I mean, it's at minimum 50%, like you were saying about it being a civil war,
Yeah.
which I think he does a good job of bringing up. But I think it was more like a majority. It was a small minority, is what Washington was leading. It was more like 30% of the populace really supported him, or 40%.
Yep.
And again, it would grow at times. And obviously, I think when the revolution started, and I think when they did, because that episode, I think it's episode 2, where he brings up the Declaration of Independence. That is obviously a moment where people are flying high. But right after that, Washington goes toe to toe with the British. I think it was at the Battle of Long Island, and I think there was another battle, but it might have exactly been the Battle of Long Island, where Washington almost lost everything. Like,
Yeah.
he acted like an idiot, and it's also true that George Washington made a lot of tactical mistakes as like
Oh,
a
for
general.
sure.
That's like historically true. He'd like leave his flanks open, and he I swear to God, like it was either the Battle of Long Island, or it was one of those battles in 1776 where he almost lost his entire army. And again, the legend of George Washington is that he's a great at retreating. That's his legend. That's his mythical power. And there is an incredible sequence in the series when he's like getting all the soldiers on boats, and they're going across, a river, and fog is descending and everything. And it paints a really amazing picture where you're like, wow, if he doesn't get away right now, the whole country like doesn't exist.
It's interesting.
Yeah. And then he sends Benedict Arnold to invade Canada.
Yeah.
That's a pretty crazy story, honestly. And I think that was one of the things I liked the most about the series, that Ken Burns really dug in and did something very interesting, which is that he made this real pitch that Benedict Arnold, notorious as the greatest traitor in the history of America, was a genius like general, and had guts and had heart,
Yeah.
and really he was there. He was there even in defeat. He was a pivotal figure, and he had big wins. And it really wasn't until late that he like, which is kind of shocking when you really hear the details of that. You're just like, dude, like, what are you? He apparently, I think that's like episode 5 or 6. He tried to like give away the whole army too. He didn't just try to like desert and give the British intelligence. He tried to like surrender his like an entire. It's like so like outrageous the amount that he was a traitor. But it's fascinating hearing about him going into Canada and just getting repelled. You
Mm.
know. But
No,
yeah, I'm kind
yeah,
of going
normally
on a
like
rant.
I've my whole life I've been like, screw Benedict Arnold. He's literally
Yeah.
one of the most evil people, but then you watch it, it's just interesting people how people are, man. That he is definitely like one of the best people in the war, and then he just marries this chick, and she just has to be, you know, I think he marries a loyalist, right? So she had to have been really hot, and it was like, hey, if you want to keep hitting this, you gotta. I don't know.
He
They like
married a
briefly talked about
loyalist.
that. How there's like speculation that newly, his newlywed may have like persuaded him to join the um
Yeah, yeah.
loyalist cause, but
That's what they were saying. Yeah. And but it's true though. I think the thing with Benedict Arnold that is also true is he had the same mindset as like arguably a majority or at least half the population believed what he was thinking, which was
Yeah.
that we don't need full independence. We are a weak group of colonies and we are not bound by anything. George Washington would go to, what was it, the Continental Congress, and
Mhm.
he would be like, I need a draft and I need like a standing army. And they were like, nah, you're going
They're
to
like,
become a
dude, chill
dictator.
out.
Yeah. So the war was even harder to be waged because our country is founded on such a hatred of monarchy and strong executive power, which I think again is obviously a major innovation in the history of the world, and it's admirable, But at the end of the day, you need I mean, the strong man of history like notion is just reality. I mean, George
Mhm.
Washington is so important. Like he's such a singularly like he's it really with this series and all the things I've read, like he really is like I mean, like all the other people, like they bring up like Thomas Paine, like writing his like like his works, like essays that are against like the monarchy and stuff, and all that stuff has an influence like on the culture of the time. And Ken Burns again, which I think is an incredibly beautiful and admirable thing, and I think this is really what you should do, is that he has quotes from more normal people as well. Like he has quotes from slaves, he has quotes from women at the time, whether it be people that were married to huge figures or women. I didn't quite know like exactly like
Mm.
what their role was, but he has a bunch of documentary evidence of what people were seeing and what they like believed. And it's just true that a lot of people they thought it was too far. They thought radical full independence was just too far. Like we had a pretty good setup. The British, they weren't
Yeah.
tyrannical with us. They really weren't. They weren't brutal with us. They never treated us in a bad way. At the most, someone like a George Washington wasn't considered a British like lord. And he was bitter about it. But it's not like they oppressed him or took away his property but they did him wrong. They didn't whatever the hell. So essentially in the war, the narrative that the sense I get, and this is from this series and a couple of books I've read, is that in 1776 we had this huge burst of energy from the Declaration of Independence,
Mm.
because that's us saying we're like a country, and that's when we celebrate becoming a country, which is kind of funny because it's like at the beginning of the war where it's like you could easily lose and like eat your words. So when we celebrate the 4th of July, we're celebrating like the beginning of the revolution when we hadn't even actually become a country. It's like us saying we're gonna do it. So it was pretty disheartening. It was pretty fucked up when, again, I don't think anyone who was like, this is harder to like assess as far as like what they were
Mm.
actually thinking of the ambition of, but I don't think anyone thought we're just going to go toe to toe with the British. We're just going to destroy them. Right. I think they always kind of knew it was an uphill battle. And so Washington, he has this moment where he almost loses everything. And from that point forward, he starts employing what he calls a Fabian strategy, which I don't know if they brought up this terminology in the series, but this is in the Joseph Ellis book. Um, I need to find this like page real quick, but it's essentially this strategy that has been used against America since then, which is the strategy of insurrection. So Washington.
Mm.
So I'm going to read a quote from this Joseph Ellis biography on Washington. Washington came to accept the fact that he must adopt a more defensive strategy and fight a war of posts, also called a Fabian strategy, after the Roman general Fabius Concoctator. I'm fucking up his name, who defeated the Carthaginians by withdrawing whenever his army's fate was at risk. It was a shift in thinking that did not come naturally to Washington. It's similar to guerrilla and terrorist strategies of the 20th century. So, in that regard, and I've heard this point made, America was almost like Vietnam to England, and England was like America in regards to, you
Mm,
know, what the Vietnam War ended up being to us.
yeah.
Because, but it's definitely different because we were just slaughtering so many people. We went hard in the paint. Like America definitely tried to win. The British, and this is the more provocative argument that I think is very worth explaining, which I think Ken Burns doesn't exactly explain it that well. It's kind of in the air. He'll just tell you things that happen, but he doesn't quite connect the dot of like, okay, but and so here's the vibe, right? Is that General Howe seemingly was very, very sympathetic with with the revolutionaries. He didn't want to violently suppress us. He wanted to give us an olive branch to come back to the British Empire. There was a moment either in 1777 or 1778 where he was like 30 miles away from Washington's army, let's say. And at any point he could have just come in and just defeated Washington's army. And this is like, you know, again, Ken Burns does a good job of bringing up all the smallpox and stuff. And by the way, like I was saying earlier about destiny kind of picking Washington. Washington had smallpox as a kid, so he was immune to smallpox.
Huh.
So he had
Oh, I forgot about the smallpox angle too. Oh my god, yeah.
yeah. So then he made a decision in some of these brutal winters to inoculate people of smallpox. But think about how miraculous that is, that the guy who's like leading our army already had this disease that's like killing all these people. And the British weren't as likely to get it because it was more rampant in Britain than in the
Mm,
colonies. So all the British had less of an issue with it. And so our army that Washington wasn't really able to even draft or have like a standing army, they were kind of just rotating in and out. And they would just, you know, there was a lot of apathy, which is, I think they do a brilliant job of in the series of explaining that, yeah, there were people who were loyalists. There were people that were, you know, for the king and all this stuff. And there were people that were for the project, the American Revolution. But there was a bunch of people that did not give a shit. Like, there were soldiers who didn't give a shit. You know what I mean? Like the soldiers would fight and they'd be like, yeah, I think I'm done. I'm just going to go home and just go home and chill. But Washington, he had a bunch of vulnerable positions, and Howe just didn't, to the degree that they replaced Howe. They got rid of
mm,
him. They bring in, I think it was either Clinton or I forget what the one of the other generals they were bringing up, but they replaced the British monarchy, and I guess it was Parliament. They like were having these battles in Parliament, being like, we got to bring in someone who's gonna like smash this uprising like brutally. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
and how, to his credit, was he almost like self-sabotaged the British Empire. Like, so there is some of that as well that we need to, that I don't think that has been addressed when I was learning about the American Revolution, but it makes a lot more sense. It's similar to like in Vietnam, you know, America started protesting the war in Vietnam. It just became very unpopular at
Mm,
home. Like, you know, the Brits they didn't care that much. I mean, they wanted to trade with us and stuff, but I don't think they really cared that much. I think by the time you were 2, 3 years in, they were just like, what are we doing? And, you know, it takes like 2 to 3 months to get any news across the ocean
yeah.
and shit. But
I think they're also fighting Spain, France, Netherlands, and someone else too. So it's kind
yeah,
of
wasn't
like
that
these
crazy?
these colonies are just kind of, it's not their top priority for
Dude, yeah,
military efforts.
by the end of the series, they're literally going to war with fucking France and Spain. There was that whole part about Spain going into Florida. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know. I knew about France, but I didn't know about Spain. I never really knew about that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, I mean, it's crazy that it really had this dimension of being a world war in a way as well. And Benjamin Franklin did such great work being in Paris, and I think he was hooking up with ladies and stuff and having a great time. And then he would just be like really trying to pull the French in. And, you know, Lafayette is a legendary figure. And it's crazy. I think, didn't they say Lafayette was like 19 or something insane and he
Yeah, it
comes
was
over?
young.
That's crazy. Like, what?
It's very crazy. Yeah, I think the series starts off in 54. So 54, Washington would have been 22.
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
pretty old by the time. Well, that's the other thing about the him in particular is like it's hard to figure out the timeline of some of this stuff, and he was really old by the time he became president. Like he really, I mean, again, we give him a lot of credit and justifiably so about stepping aside and not becoming a dictator or a king.
Right.
He was fucking old. He really didn't want to
Yeah.
do it as well, like, which is also a common story with a lot of presidents. You know, I mean, Andrew Jackson, when he became the president, I think his like wife just died. So like that
Oh
happens a
yeah.
lot as well. Like presidents take power and like they have like a kid die or something hideous happens in their life and like they just are like profoundly depressed the entire time they're the president. And Washington was kind of similar. I forget what if he had any tragedies in his personal life, but he was definitely like an old man. So there's this sequence that Ken Burns kind of does justice to it. And obviously we would be doing injustice to our lives and the history of whether it be podcasting or talking about the American Revolution. We didn't talk about Louis and on Matt and Shane's is one of our go-to podcasts and is talking about these kind of subjects.
Oh, sure.
And he brought this up when he did his president series on Matt and Shane's that literally, I think it was like in 1887 or some shit like that. Or sorry, 1787.
Yeah.
And they kind of bring this up in one of the episodes, but they didn't like explain it that well. That he literally 1783. So right after they beat the British, and that was also fascinating to me. It really almost did. Warfare is kind of crazy. It really does almost end up feeling like chess or something. The way that America kind of trapped, like we got the French involved, and the French come in from the sea, and we close in on them at Yorktown. And sorry everyone, we're jumping around with all the battles and stuff. When I think about military history and shit, like I'm not as interested in like every specific battle, but you know,
Sure.
Yorktown, it is fascinating how it's like, the French come in from the sea and when we just trap the British army, and Washington out of spite makes the British like, and by the way, it's not Cromwell, it's another British general, like doesn't even show up to surrender.
Cornwallis, yeah.
Yeah, of course. He doesn't even show up. He's so embarrassed. And so the number 2 of the British military shows up to surrender to Washington, and then Washington defers him to the number 2.
And so yeah, you give them the sword, but then it's custom to give it back, right? But I think
Yeah.
isn't that more humiliating? I don't know. It's like, no, we'll
Yeah,
give it back to you. It's all right.
no, the whole thing is humiliating because I think they said in the Ken Burns, like, he tried to give it to the French first. He's like, here you go. And the French are like, no, the Americans beat you. You got to give it to them. Which is like, they just didn't want to. And again, I think some of this is definitely hyped up. I mean, the British, they disliked aspects of our culture. Like, there is that. But I think it's definitely bullshit. The idea that the British really disliked like America all that much, like we were just very rambunctious. I mean, there was another anecdote. I'm like cutting myself off when that German guy shows up, which is a legendary guy.
Oh yeah.
It's like De Goin or something. I forget what his
Yeah.
name is.
I think
Uh,
that's it.
and he shows up and he's like swearing on all these different languages. And he's like, every army in the world, I tell them to do something and they do it. I tell these guys to do something, they ask why. They need to know why to do it. which is
Wow.
like that's like so inspiring. If that's really America's legacy immediately, is that we're just like we just talk back to like our parents. But no, he's a legendary guy. Some of the and oh yeah, they're bringing up the Hessians and stuff, which is kind of a crazy story as well. That all these Hessian mercenaries just ended up integrating into society later as well. But no, so yeah, I've heard that pitched as how the American Revolution was won before. That we had like we you know, the British had some mercenaries, but we had a lot of help where we would have like yeah this that the German guy, and I think Ken Burns said he was accused of being a pedophile or some shit too.
Whoa.
Did you hear that?
No, I don't remember that.
Bro, they said about him that he was accused of like it would he said the term and didn't explain, but it was like
Oh
of
my god.
something with boys, like asking for the company of boys or something like that, and was like reprimanded in like whatever military. He's like it was like a weird like aside where you're like, wait, what? But so that guy was a legendary figure where he like helped whip the men into shape. And, you know, it really was a ragtag group of guys, but they did like kind of like the Battle of Algiers, like terrorist, you know,
Mm.
insurgency style that, you know, there was a lot of that, which is like, I think Mel Gibson's The Patriot famously has a lot of
Oh.
sequences like that. But yeah, it's not a lot. There are head to head battles, but it's like strategically, like I was saying with the Fabian approach. But what's really even more chilling about all of this is that as much as George Washington was loved, there was a lot of moments where people were really criticizing him.
Oh
Like they
yeah.
really thought he couldn't do it. They wanted to replace him. I think it's like Horatio Gates was the other
Mm-hmm.
general, and he was like literally almost led like a military takeover of the country in 1783 after they had won the American Revolution. And there's this iconic thing where Washington. So, firstly, 1783, Washington doesn't want to become a king. So that's the first time he's asked to be king a bunch. Let's just say that,
Yeah.
and he says no a couple of times. So
I think that was that's in the last episode when the military tries to have one more mutiny and it fails like very quickly, I think.
yeah, there was a threatened coup led by Horatio Gates, who were prepared to act on the threat and attempt a military takeover of the government. This is after, because the army was the strongest it had ever been, was after we had actually expelled the British, but we were preparing for them to send more ships, because you don't really know, like you had this huge battle win at Yorktown, and you didn't think they would all just like give up. They might just send in way more,
Mm.
because you know they could, like I was saying about Vietnam, like the British very easily could have just kept up this war longer. I mean, it put them into debt and all this stuff, but Washington didn't know that at the time. And
Right. It wasn't hold on. I wrote it. They could have fought the war, but politically it was just so uninteresting at that point and just discouraging to keep it going. But like they had
yeah,
the
yeah,
money to do it, right? I basically was like the
yeah.
gist.
They were losing money, but it's still the British Empire. You know, like they could have like focused on this. Is kind of the vibe I get. They could have. I mean, they were. It was a difficult position to be in, but it was definitely kind of a conservative. Like, let's not. This is not really the hill to die on. This whole thing. You know, but no, it was literally his officers like wanted. So before Congress, I mean, literally the politicians wanted him to be a king. So firstly, the military was asking him. It's like dissident officers and stuff, and he gives a speech to his officers, being like, "This is like against the spirit of the revolution. What you guys are saying,"
Mm.
and he gets them to calm the fuck down. And the I was bringing up the Louis thing because there he essentially, I guess there's two different discussions. I guess he had like a behind closed doors discussion where he said this stuff, and then he had this thing that Louis talked about, which is on March 16th, 1783, where Washington goes to a meeting chaired by Horatio Gates, and the whole point of this like meeting, I guess, is for Washington to tell the military not to take over the country.
Oh my god.
And he has this moment where he goes like he walks slowly to the podium, reaches inside his jacket to pull out his prepared remarks, then he pauses. The gesture is almost certainly planned. And he pulls from his waistcoat a pair of spectacles recently sent to him
Mm.
by David Rittenhouse, the Philadelphia scientist. No one had ever seen Washington wear spectacles before in public. And he looks out at assembled officers and adjusts his glasses and he says, "Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I hate not only, for I have not only grown gray, but almost blind in the service of my country." And several officers, and Louis brings us up when he's describing this on Matt and Shane's, and it's so funny the way he says it, but it is true. This is what I'm reading from a book, too. It says several officers began to sob.
Mm.
And he literally just is like, "I'm an old man. We fought for this revolution, and you're trying to like fuck this all up. You're trying to do like a dictator." I don't even know what they were like attempting to do. Again, I've been drinking. I'm not an expert on the American Revolution as much as I am with other historical topics, but Washington had all the power in the world, and he was being pressured. But then he was also pressured from the other side. He was pressured like, you're a king, fuck you, or you made this mistake, fuck you. He was under so much pressure. But no, I mean, just in regards to the series itself, I mean, I think we mentioned quite a bit as far as like different moments. Did you have anything else to add as far as like from the series?
Um. Well, I texted you early on that like I just found like my favorite part of the series was just the individual stories.
Uh huh.
I just found them so endearing. Like the one dude, I think it was towards the end. He at the end of the war, he walks from New York to Philadelphia bare feet, or sorry,
Oh
barefoot,
God.
and his whole family thinks he's dead, and then he just shows up to his house after fighting in the war.
Oh my God.
Or I found the I forget her name, but she was the slave who was the first African American to get published.
Mm.
Her poems I thought were very beautiful. Um, Also, the aspect of like Britain offering pension to slaves if they can escape to like fight
Yeah,
for their
yeah.
art was just crazy. I think I knew like heard that a while ago and I just kind of forgot that historical fact
Yeah, yeah, it's
because it's
kind of
just
surreal.
a weird, it's just I guess in retrospect just a interesting strategy. I mean, because you're if you don't know anything historically, your gut tells you like, oh well, Britain was like probably anti-slavery, and it's like no, they just were like, we need to win this war,
Yeah, yeah.
we need to
Which
crush this rebellion.
I think is ultimately a very Ken Burns like perspective on the whole thing is just that the language of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution is very inspiring to blacks and women and the Native Americans at the time, and ultimately it is like a kind of the destiny of America to be able to integrate blacks and women into the political system the way we have. And it is the
Yeah,
tragedy of America that we annihilated the Native Americans. And you can talk about all of it. You can, I mean, this is all just truth. It's unfortunate. I mean, it doesn't seem like it would have been possible for because it was a big part of the economy at the time. It like
yeah,
they couldn't have waged the revolution without this big part of their economy, which again is a very dark thing to say, but it is true. And
Yeah.
like Adams and all these different people, there were a bunch of people that were just vehemently anti-slavery as soon as I mean, slavery was just this monolith that was really, it was very clear because of how brilliant these documents were, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, which again, you got to give credit to the language of these documents, even though Thomas Jefferson, had babies with slaves and like
Oh God.
kept his slave, never freed his slaves, even though he's like one of the most brilliant legal minds and all this stuff. And he, all men are created equal. I believe it's Thomas Jefferson, quoting like John Locke or something, right?
Yeah.
And it's a contradiction, but at the end of the day, like this language did give the opportunity for the neoliberal society. I mean, by any historical standard, I mean, America is the most liberal country in the history of the world. And by that definition, these slave owners had they had like this kind of progressive streak in their in what they were striving for. I don't think they thought they could achieve everything in real time. And if you ask any of these guys, if you ask anyone in the 1800s, I don't think they were, it was hotly debated. I think people thought slavery had to go, though. It was in the consciousness that slavery eventually has to go because it's such a contradiction of our founding document. Does that mean they thought black people were equal to them? No, it doesn't. That'd be a lie. If I'm going to sit here and say that any number of presidents thought that blacks were equal to whites, it's not true. You got to tell history how it is. It's not true. But there's steps, right? It's like slavery itself. This has to go. And there's a lot that goes into like when Lincoln does it, right? I mean, there's tactical aspects to that as well, because you're kind of, I think in that sense, there's almost an argument like you're almost like fucking with the Confederate economy by that stage. But Lincoln, that was always kind of his goal in general, was to get rid of slavery. But he wasn't an abolitionist, you know what I mean? Which is, you kind of see that in Spielberg's Lincoln, even, where he's talking to Tommy Lee Jones. Daniel Day-Lewis is talking to Tommy Lee Jones. He's going like, hey, man, we can't get rid of slavery if you're saying that blacks are equal to whites, which it's like, it's really dark. Like it's dark and kind of fucked up to see that context, but that's just like the moment. Like you can't go too far with the argument or else it's going to be dead on arrival. So there's a lot of those kind of moments in American history where there's enough of an ideal that's being striven for, and then the rest kind of follows a little bit later, And I think that's, some people will call that like woke, but I think that's just like the reality of like history. I mean, progressivism is definitely a fascinating kind of concept, but in general, I mean, I think that there's been, obviously a positive progression, and universal suffrage and all this stuff is definitely an innovation of our society that is become pretty much the foundation of the Western world. And it's pretty amazing when you look all the way back at the American Revolution and you see these really complicated guys that were brutal and they were violent and they were, like I'm saying, it's almost like they're ancient Greek philosopher warriors or philosopher kings that didn't believe in equal rights, even though they like had enough of like a literary side to them that they could say they did. They could tell that the word on the page was wonderful, but then like to actually do it in their own life, it's like, and they even bring it up in the series where it's like someone says in the series, we all have conflicts like that. Like this is more emblematic of how every person is like this, than it is the founding fathers were evil. And I think that's the ultimate Ken Burns optimism that honestly, I don't really think that is shared by the average person. That, and again, the term woke is like, there's so many different definitions of what that even means. But if you're going to take like a radical leftist who loves Karl Marx, right? They don't like America. They don't like George Washington. They don't like, any of these people. And Ken Burns definitely kind of likes them. He sees them as complicated. He sees them as as having immense capacity for evil, doing things that you really can't forgive any of this stuff. And credit to Ken. I think it's a testament to the 21st century that you can get such a diversity of different people who are like historians talking on the period. And I think you can have a more like right wing perspective on the American Revolution. I think that's possible. I feel like that's not really more of my issue with this series than it is. Again, I'm not even as much of an expert on the American Revolution, but like I just said, I would have preferred a little more historical honesty about the military trying to do a coup in Washington. Not like he didn't really work that out, and that's not really a political moment, like, or a political failure that Ken Burns doesn't bring that up. It's just kind of like too much information, and you have to make decisions on what's in the doc and what isn't. And so yeah, I don't know. I think ultimately my conclusion is like, I don't know. I don't think this series is very woke by any definition.
Mm.
I think it's pretty standard Ken Burns. I don't know if it's his best series, but to say that it's like super leftist is just not true. I mean, I wouldn't call it a right wing perspective on the American Revolution. I think it's definitely a liberal historical perspective, but it's pretty much checks out. I mean, everything I know, like I'd like a little bit more details added in here or there, but it's not like he's just like making shit up. Like I don't know. That's what I love about history. I love that history is shocking. Like it's just kind of shocking. Like there's so many aspects about it, whether it be the miraculous being achieved or just the inequality and the severity of an era that is just like so hopeful. Like I mean, I feel like in our moment today, like we just don't even have anywhere near that level of hope. And our material conditions and our level of comfort is just on another level. We don't have
Yeah.
we don't have slavery being legal like in the
God.
21st century. Like, women can vote, blacks can vote, like everyone can vote, and everyone is just so unhappy. And it's like, there's something kind of touching about how scathing that moment was in
Mm.
contrast to how how lofty the ambition of the country was. And I think that's ultimately what Ken Burns, like what his main conclusion would be. It's kind of a literary, poetic goal to strive for. And yeah, we don't have to even get into all kinds of other stuff that makes all this stuff more confusing. And there's so many angles to take on this where we could just get bogged down in like so many different areas. Like so many different areas about like politics and all this stuff. And again, there's also different kinds of like people, different kinds of presidents. Andrew Jackson, for instance, was
He's like 9 when all this is like a young boy when all this is going on.
yeah, and then he fought in like the year of 1812, like war, or the War of 1812, like. And Washington, also say, as a president, was pretty great. He was, again, also very moderate. He was essentially, you know, George Washington. He was the shit. He had the aura where people were like, "Oh my God, that's George Washington." Like that was the vibe when he walked in a room. It was like, that's the guy. That's the guy. And even though people had disagreements with it, people had scathing criticisms of him. And there was a lot of dissension. There was a lot of shit talking. I think Thomas Jefferson, even within the cabinet, like either resigned or something, and he had all kinds of problems with Washington, how he was being a president. And Washington was the only president to lead troops in any kind of way. There was a whiskey rebellion. There was like a whiskey tax or something, and these people were like not letting the tax collectors collect the tax, and they were like going to kill them. And the tax collectors would go running.
Yeah.
And Washington literally marches his army through this area in Pittsburgh in 1795 or
While
something.
he's president.
When he's the only president to lead an army. And of course nothing happened. He just walks through the town and everyone looks at him and they go, "That's George fucking Washington right there."
Oh
They
man.
stopped their shit. And then he said, "I'm not going to penalize anyone who was disobeying the tax. You just got to pay it now." No one's going to jail, but you're just going to pay it. Another thing he did, notoriously anti-intervention, which is I adore. One of the great anti-interventionist voices in the history of America, which is important because it's the first guy and he set the precedent on 2 terms, the 8 years, all that kind of stuff. That, again, there was no law in American history that you could only serve 2 terms. That didn't happen
That didn't happen until like our
FDR.
grandparents were alive.
Yeah. FDR did 4 terms, and then the Republicans were like, all right, that was a little much. And both sides were like, let's just get. So everyone, including like a Teddy Roosevelt, right? Who I'm going to read some biographies of Teddy Roosevelt, but Teddy Roosevelt, Ken Burns makes the point in the Roosevelt series that Teddy should have ran for a 3rd term. But that he didn't because he wanted to honor the legacy of Washington and every president before him.
And then Taft goes in there and he's like, "Nah, you suck. I'm doing it. I'm actually going to do it."
Yeah, and people say that about Lincoln. People say that Lincoln would have done 10 terms. Like he would never would have stepped aside. I don't know how true that is, but it was never a law. It was never an amendment that you couldn't do it. It was just because of George Washington that you did 2 terms. And that includes Andrew Jackson, who was like, again, a military leader who did what he wanted. Like he would just do what he wanted. He was very executive, but presidents didn't veto anything. They had the veto power. They never vetoed anything. Jackson, when he became the president, he vetoed more bills as the president than any other president combined, including he vetoed the bank. They had a bill that was like, here's the bill that has the bank exist. And then he vetoed it because he hated banks. Like, that's another level of like aura farming, or but no, going back to the Washington point before we wrap up here. Washington was such a visionary. He was such a visionary, was not college educated, was not nearly as well educated as all of his peers who were genius legal scholars and, literary brains and philosopher coded guys. He was still a military genius. He said in the 1890s, we will go to war with Britain again. It's going to happen, but we can't do it for 20 years. We can't go to war with Britain for 20 years. It'll happen in 20 years. And it did. The War of 1812. He literally is on the record predicting a war would happen. And the anti-interventionism was specifically that we're not ready. That if we go back into a war with Britain, we get our fucking asses kicked. And it's the same thing with any of the European powers. It's some of that, but it's just that let's just not meddle with the European affairs. They're all in war all the time. The British are always going to war with the French. This is a joke. We have the ocean separating us. Why interfere in this stuff? And I think that's just we're talking about all these precedents that Washington set. How is that not one of the most the greatest legacies in the history of our country? The idea that we shouldn't meddle in foreign affairs. We should be anti-interventionist, we should. And that's one of the greatest military like leaders we've ever had. A guy that like had plenty of executive power. He could have done anything he wanted, and he was on the side of moderation. I'm sure he was definitely for having a powerful military, but he wasn't for getting involved in foreign affairs like that. And no, going back to the Native American thing too, going back to the darker side of Washington's legacy is, he believed in Western expansion or westward expansion, which it was unfortunate. They kind of bring it up in the series, but I don't know if I think there was a conglomeration of back and forth, like that the Native Americans, some of them were siding with Britain and some of them were siding with us,
Yeah.
but one of Washington's contentions, even before the American Revolution with the British, was that the British were telling the colonies, you can't go west. I believe. I believe that was another aspect of this, that Washington always believed that we will go west and we will defeat, the Native Americans. And I'm butchering this, not to go into it too much, but he definitely believed in like westward expansion for sure, is kind of what I would say. In this moment, I don't have anything else notable to bring up with it, but just to give a full picture of who Washington was, And again,
Mm.
I think there are definitely pretty incredibly lofty ideals and aspects of what Washington represented, and frankly, no one can really just purely transcend their time. It's not to be an apologist for it, but I don't know. At least at least he freed his slaves. I thought, right? Didn't he free him when he died? At least.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't know.
I'm like 95% sure that, because it was a similar thing. He had a thing where he was like, if I free my slaves, I don't have my money. It's like
Yeah.
I will be poor.
Then I have to work.
Okay, no, it was only after his wife died.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, they 123 enslaved people were freed in 1801 from the Washington, like
Oh,
Mount Vernon or something.
because he
So
dies at 99, so that's after. That's
yeah.
interesting.
So again, I think that's definitely good to actually free them after you're dead. I mean, it would be great if we could sit here and say that George Washington was the most perfect guy, but it's just not true.
Yeah.
It's just it doesn't make history less fascinating to admit that historical figures are. And again, it's like this Tocqueville quote that I always bring up, where it's like, being a great man is just completely different than being a good man. Like it never
Mm.
corresponds. It never corresponds. If you're the president of a nation, you order people killed. You rise to power through lies. You lie about your political opposition, you get dirt on your political opposition, you lie to the media, you lie about yourself, you have people killed. That's reality. That's reality. Every president, every world leader ever. There's no world leader that hasn't done those two things. It's synonymous with world leaders. So if you're going to assess world leaders on a curve of, these are all by definition evil as far as having the capacity for evil, but the lofty ambition of a nation is in ideas and ideals, and the lofty ambitions of individuals is something they can't even achieve. I think that's a different kind of conversation. And I personally would love a little bit more clarity in the coming years, where America can agree a little bit on certain things. I mean, we're not going to get into a whole like political discussion on like what that would like look like, obviously, but I think I think saying America like should never have existed is probably let's just say it's a dead end. That's my hot take. That's a little bit of a dead end to be like, oh yeah, well they're all evil, so fuck it. It should all burn. The whole thing should never have happened. It's like okay, you can believe that. That's fine. I don't know if that's a very. I don't know if that's a either cohesive or I don't know if I don't know if that perspective like really like means very much, you know? Like I just but yeah, there's always room for improvement. God bless. We'll be back at some point. We'll figure out. There's a lot of movies coming out this month, so peace
Yeah.
out.
See you guys.